Everybody hold on to your hat out there. Fast and Loud is no more.
The world was stunned when federal agents raided Gas Monkey Garage's Dallas headquarters. As investigators dig deeper, they uncover evidence that Richard Rawlings knew about illegal operations long before the FBI arrived. Dennis Collins is now at the center of attention. Was he involved with something much worse than anyone imagined? What was he hiding? And how far did Rawlings go to cover up the truth? The answers might shock you. The raid that stunned automotive television. There was tension in the air. The doors were wide open. Employees had been escorted outside without warning. Someone at a neighboring business knew something serious was happening and called the local news. Federal agents appeared in force, expecting to find evidence of a sophisticated operation. Inside, they discovered something very strange. Richard Rawlings' office was unusually organized, documents arranged in a way that didn't make sense. He didn't touch his phone as it lay on the desk, like he had been expecting this moment all along. Aaron Kaufman, his former master mechanic, was contacted immediately for questioning. There were financial documents scattered across multiple locations. The shop's records showed irregular patterns. There were no signs of normal business operations. 3 Gas Monkey employees were being questioned separately, while others watched in shock. There was a problem. The evidence uncovered was not what the public expected. The seizure had been methodical and targeted. It was already time to start connecting the dots. The FBI found that Rawlings had been involved in a complex scheme extending far beyond custom cars. The garage floor was now covered with federal evidence markers. Tools sat abandoned mid-project. Parts inventories were being photographed in detail. It felt like time had frozen at Gas Monkey Garage. The agents had one central question that needed answering. How did a reality TV star known for his brash honesty and straightforward car flips end up under federal investigation? The answer came from an unexpected source. Rawlings' acquisition records had preserved details of every vehicle transaction. Those records were examined by investigators. That changed everything. Richard might have been operating a sophisticated operation since 2019. If that's the case, the garage had been the front for something much larger for at least 6 years. There were no standard documentation trails. Nothing connecting the dots, obviously. No clear paper trail for outsiders to follow. Still, something didn't add up. Why were certain vehicles coming through the shop documented differently? Why did some cars lack proper importation paperwork if everything was legitimate? More questions emerged with every file examined. There was a small private office behind Rawlings' main workspace. Had someone been monitoring operations from that hidden position? Had vehicles been deliberately misrepresented on customs forms? The financial records showed concerning patterns. There were not simple profits from car flips, not typical business income streams. There was something more complex hidden in plain sight. Then, investigators made a discovery that transformed the case. Their records showed that Richard Rawlings had been involved with importing vehicles with falsified histories. Someone had been changing VIN numbers, obscuring origins, and manipulating import documentation. There were irregular transactions identified through financial forensics. Strange shipping manifests with inconsistent details appeared in multiple filings. Before the FBI arrived at Gas Monkey Garage, someone knew exactly what they were doing. It was revealing that the document trail led directly to Rawlings himself. The investigation shifted focus. The evidence contradicted his public persona. He claimed transparency was his business model. The documentation showed otherwise. There were discrepancies in vehicle histories. The investigators looked deeper. They discovered something even more concerning. This was bigger than just car importation violations. It connected to international operations. Records of vehicles with questionable provenance had been systematically manipulated before they entered the US market. Before anyone outside the operation understood the scale, someone had already established sophisticated methods to bypass scrutiny. There was compelling evidence. The situation was escalating rapidly. Was Richard Rawlings's television empire built partially on illegal importation, or was something even more calculated happening behind the Gas Monkey brand? The 24-hour special monitoring, the timeline of operations. When federal agents analyzed Richard Rawlings' communication records, the case evolved dramatically. Before the raid, the monitoring had captured patterns of suspicious messages. It was evident from the timestamps when certain vehicles moved through the operation. Everything changed after specific coded communications. Investigators searched for patterns in the transactions. They reviewed his email archives. No obvious admissions. No explicit references to illegal activities. No searchable terms that would trigger conventional monitoring systems. His financial activities showed sophisticated compartmentalization. No obvious red flags in public-facing accounts. Then they discovered something revealing. Security cameras at Gas Monkey Garage captured unusual late-night activities that didn't align with the television show's portrayal of operations. There were vehicle deliveries occurring at 3 a.m. Certain areas of the shop were deliberately kept out of television footage. Inside the facility, specific vehicles underwent identity transformations that weren't documented on the show. The front office operated normally, though. Someone was maintaining a perfect public image while something very different happened in select areas of the shop. The FBI examined the shop's inventory management system. The logs revealed alarming discrepancies. Before certain vehicles appeared on Fast and Loud, the documentation process followed unusual protocols. No standard intake procedures. Do not enter consistent details. But something seemed calculated about the approach. Every transaction followed a specific pattern. Every international acquisition had particular documentation irregularities. His communication showed careful wordsmithing. His operation functioned with practiced precision. His business appeared legitimate while specific vehicles received special handling. Then all evidence of origin disappeared. The investigators uncovered Rawlings' digital footprints surrounding these transactions. His communication patterns. His search history regarding import regulations. His most recent contact with international suppliers. Each one reflected sophisticated understanding of customs enforcement vulnerabilities. Then, another significant finding emerged. Digital forensics revealed encrypted communication channels linking Gas Monkey Garage with overseas partners. The system utilized sophisticated proxy networks because it continually rerouted connections through different international servers, concealing true origins. The encryption protocol appeared active during specific vehicle acquisitions. There was someone coordinating these activities. Someone understood importation enforcement limitations. Rawlings should have documented every vehicle's full history if operating legitimately. There were significant omissions in the records, though. Why didn't he maintain complete documentation if everything was proper? Why didn't he follow standard import protocols? The FBI reviewed his international travel history. On March 15, 2023, there was one particularly notable trip. It appeared routine and unremarkable in isolation. But now investigators recognized it, coincided perfectly with the acquisition of several vehicles with questionable documentation. That week, multiple high-value cars entered the Gas Monkey operation through unusual channels. The federal agents focused on identifying everyone with operational knowledge. Someone who participated in documentation manipulation. Someone who coordinated the international aspects. That's when they redirected resources. The communication patterns had revealed wider participation. They were now constructing the complete operational structure. What did Rawlings' inner circle know? The business network's involvement. It wasn't immediately apparent how extensive Richard Rawlings' operation had become. People were initially focused on the dramatic FBI raid, the vehicle seizures, and the financial records. But as investigators continued their analysis, they discovered something that transformed their understanding. Rawlings had cultivated relationships with specific international suppliers who never appeared on camera. He claimed these were simple business connections. There were no legitimate import records corresponding with these relationships. The facts contradicted his explanations. Investigators analyzed his financial accounts. They expected to find normal business transactions and standard operating expenses. They discovered sophisticated structuring instead. He had established multiple business entities that operated in coordination. There were international transactions flowing through seemingly unrelated companies. Questions about customs enforcement were occurring at precisely calculated intervals. Then investigators discovered the specialized equipment. someone had installed professional-grade VIN plate reproduction technology in a secluded area of the Gas Monkey facility. The equipment's orientation suggested deliberate concealment from casual observation. The technical sophistication indicated professional-level understanding of vehicle identification systems. Authorities began asking difficult questions. Did his business partners understand the operation's true nature? Had he established the television show partially as cover for other activities? What his associates did raised additional concerns. When confronted with documentation irregularities, responses became evasive. The explanations lacked consistency. They couldn't explain the sophisticated equipment hidden within the facility. Then, another concerning detail emerged. Rawlings had been communicating with a specialized attorney focused on import regulations, which was the same day a particularly valuable vehicle with questionable documentation entered the facility. But no legal compliance adjustments followed these consultations. He was seeking information on enforcement vulnerabilities rather than compliance guidance. So why was someone researching enforcement limitations if operating legitimately? The timeline was becoming increasingly problematic. If he understood import regulations sufficiently to consult specialized attorneys, his documentation irregularities couldn't be dismissed as simple oversight. Rawlings's television empire wasn't just about automotive entertainment. It had evolved into something more complex: money, international connections, systematic regulatory circumvention. The evidence suggested sophisticated understanding rather than casual mistakes. Every new discovery strengthened investigators' understanding of the operation. The pieces interconnected with remarkable precision, and federal authorities were constructing a comprehensive understanding of the entire system. A coordinated operation was being exposed, and there would be significant consequences once fully documented. The vehicle identification analysis. When the forensic reports were completed, they didn't resolve questions, but intensified them. Richard Rawlings's imported vehicles didn't show obvious physical tampering, not crude VIN alterations. There were no amateur modification attempts. There were no obvious signs that would trigger standard inspection protocols. The same professional approach characterized all documentation inconsistencies. Initial suspicions that these might represent simple paperwork errors were quickly dismissed. The facility's air, workspaces, and every potential explanation for innocent mistakes had been thoroughly investigated by federal authorities. Nothing supported that interpretation. There were no indications that the sophisticated irregularities represented accidental compliance failures. After eliminating that possibility, investigators confronted a more concerning reality. What motivated these systematic documentation manipulations, if not trying to conceal something significant about specific vehicles' histories? The technical analysis continued. The reports on identification methodologies were particularly revealing. Not amateur techniques. No crude approaches. They revealed sophisticated understanding of vehicle identification systems and import documentation requirements. Later, however, investigators identified something that didn't align with legitimate operations. There weren't standard documentation practices that should have characterized every imported vehicle. Richard Rawlings had extensive international experience. He had built a global brand. He understood proper procedures. But those procedures were selectively implemented depending on specific vehicles' origins. It wasn't simply documentation inconsistencies. If he maintained proper records for most vehicles, but selectively applied different standards to others, there should have been evidence of deliberate selection criteria, and investigators found exactly that pattern when analyzing the complete inventory history. Authorities began considering more troubling possibilities. What if Rawlings' operation wasn't characterized by simple regulatory violations, but by something more calculated? It's possible that someone had established a sophisticated system for obscuring certain vehicles' origins while maintaining perfect legitimacy for others. An accident or oversight can explain individual errors. The forensic analysis demonstrated that the same sophisticated approach characterized dozens of vehicles over several years. That wasn't coincidental. That wasn't accidental oversight. That represented systematic operations. Federal authorities then examined the vehicles currently under construction in the facility. Why hadn't proper documentation been maintained if everything was legitimate? Why were certain VIN-related components segregated within the facility? maybe the explanation was more complex than initially suspected. Or was there something or someone ensuring that specific vehicles received special processing? Everything changed when investigators uncovered the pattern. It demonstrated intent. It pointed toward calculated operations rather than accidental non-compliance. Now, federal authorities weren't simply investigating regulatory violations. They were constructing a case around the possibility of a sophisticated international operation. And that operation appeared to be built around someone who had developed expertise in navigating between legitimate and questionable vehicle acquisitions. The international connection and legal implications. Almost immediately, the international dimensions of Richard Rawlings' operation became apparent. His network, established over decades in the automotive world, was now under intense scrutiny. Even before the official investigation concluded, federal authorities identified concerning patterns involving international vehicle movements. But when they examined his global connections more closely, they were genuinely surprised. There were systematic relationships with specific overseas suppliers. Important documentation was consistently missing. Before Rawlings was even officially charged, someone was already coordinating with international enforcement agencies. It was impossible to ignore the timing. The evidence trail was filled with Richard Rawlings' distinctive operational style. He had been cultivating these international relationships for years before the FBI raided Gas Monkey Garage. His representatives admitted that he maintained regular contact with overseas suppliers, but there was a critical distinction. These relationships allegedly focused exclusively on legitimate transactions. However, documents and financial transfers showed that someone had been orchestrating a more complex international operation. Federal prosecutors assembled the evidence. The international documentation had been systematically modified, altered, and submitted for review under conditions designed to minimize scrutiny. It was organized by someone who understood enforcement limitations. Were they being strategic? Or did someone already understand exactly how to circumvent regulatory oversight? Legal analysts disagreed about the implications. Some characterized the operation as sophisticated regulatory circumvention, while others described systematic smuggling operations. If Richard Rawlings was coordinating international movement of vehicles with questionable documentation, what other aspects of the operation remained undiscovered? The legal battle intensified when the documentation inconsistencies, financial transfers, and international coordination became increasingly apparent at the worst possible moment. Federal prosecutors began constructing their comprehensive case. There was a clear pattern of activities. This extended beyond simple import violations. It involved sophisticated international coordination, systematic documentation manipulation, and careful operational security. As the case developed, Richard Rawlings confronted a reality he hadn't anticipated. His carefully constructed public image was collapsing under federal scrutiny. 24-hour international monitoring uncovers the truth. The investigation now focused exclusively on Richard Rawlings' international connections. Too many concerning patterns had emerged from his overseas relationships. Federal authorities needed comprehensive understanding, so they coordinated with international partners to monitor his global network. Every relationship was examined. Every financial transfer, communication pattern, and vehicle movement was analyzed. What they discovered was devastating. His international activities revealed a story that contradicted his public image. There were regular encrypted communications. Funds moved through sophisticated structures. There were specialized couriers moving documentation between countries. It appeared these activities were coordinated during specific acquisition phases. Private communications were analyzed by investigators. Messages sent to international partners revealed something troubling. Richard had been discussing specific vehicles using coded language before they entered legitimate documentation channels. On paper, operations appeared normal when certain acquisitions were already being processed through alternative documentation pathways. Even more concerning information emerged from financial analysis. The timeline showed that he had established specialized payment channels, coordinated with specific international partners, and maintained operational security while publicly promoting complete transparency. He engaged in activities that only made sense if operating a parallel system alongside legitimate business operations. Financial transfers during critical acquisition phases provided some of the most compelling evidence. Forensic accounting revealed that Richard Rawlings had established sophisticated payment structures that couldn't be justified by legitimate business requirements alone. It was no longer speculation. The evidence from international monitoring, financial analysis, and communication patterns all supported the same conclusion. This wasn't simply a celebrity making occasional mistakes. This represented a sophisticated operation with international dimensions. Third indictment. The evidence became overwhelming. 1. Person was connected to documentation, irregularities, international coordination, and sophisticated operational security. While operating a public-facing television empire, Richard Rawlings appeared to be simultaneously managing something far more complex. Federal prosecutors constructed their case around systematic import violations, showing patterns of deliberate manipulation, calculated documentation strategies, and international coordination. It was time for legal accountability. The indictment was unsealed. He was formally charged with multiple federal violations related to vehicle importation regulations. Prosecutors methodically presented their findings. The case moved through federal procedures with remarkable efficiency, each component demonstrating how systematic the operation had become. The missing documentation, the international coordination, the sophisticated operational security. The timeline was unambiguous. He had established an operation that functionally operated alongside his legitimate business activities. The decision was definitive. Under mounting evidence, Richard Rawlings accepted a plea agreement rather than face trial. He acknowledged responsibility for specific regulatory violations while maintaining that he never fully understood the technical requirements. Every episode of Fast and Loud, every public appearance, and every statement about transparency now required re-examination. He had built an entertainment empire around automotive knowledge, but legal accountability ultimately arrived. There was nothing that could prevent it now. No television fame, no public persona. The gas monkey empire faced an uncertain future, but even after the legal proceedings concluded, questions remained. What really motivated the operation? Did Richard truly believe he was simply navigating complex regulations, or was something more calculated happening at Gas Monkey Garage? Even with legal resolution, uncertainty persists. Some observers believe the complete operational picture hasn't been fully revealed. The truth behind Richard Rawlings's international vehicle operation may never be completely understood. What do you think really happened behind the Gas Monkey doors? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and click the next video appearing on your screen.